Nobody wanted dog number 7. He was too old, too slow, and the bidding started at $10. $10 for a dog who had served 8 years on the force. The masking tape on his cage said everything the department thought he was worth now. Officer Ray Daniels stood at the back of the auction yard with his hands in his pockets. He'd come to say goodbye, not to buy. He couldn't afford to buy. He told himself that the whole drive down. When the auctioneer reached for the tool's vest to strip it before the sale, the old German shepherd did something that made every person in that yard go completely still. He growled, low, controlled, protective, not of himself, of the vest. Everyone laughed nervously. Ray didn't. He'd seen that look before, on active duty, when a dog was guarding something that couldn't be allowed to disappear. Stay with us, because what was hidden inside that vest will leave you speechless. Thank you for being here. Please subscribe and like this video. And before we continue, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I love knowing who's out there listening. The auction yard smelled like diesel and old metal and something without a name. But anyone who had ever worked a K9 unit would have recognized it. The specific heaviness of a place where working animals were being processed like surplus inventory. 37 buyers in folding chairs facing a row of 12 cages. The dogs in the first 11 cages were under 6 years old. Starting bids between $300 and $800. Their certifications were clipped to the gate. Cage 12 had a strip of masking tape. Zeus sat in the back of that cage with his spine straight, front legs squared, eyes forward. Not the posture of a dog waiting to be chosen, the posture of a dog told to hold position and holding it. Ray had given that command hundreds of times in 11 years. He knew exactly what it looked like. The vest was what stopped him. Old-style tactical, olive drab nylon. The kind the department stopped issuing in 2019. Every buckle fastened, both side panels secured. Someone had kept this vest in working condition, not the kennel. The kennel did not maintain gear. Someone before the kennel had done this deliberately. Nobody was looking at cage 12. Buyers pointed at younger dogs, asked about prices, flipped through catalogs. An older man near the fence hadn't looked up from page 3. Ray stood at the back of the crowd with his hands in his pockets and did not move. He had told Sandra he was coming to say goodbye. He was beginning to understand that was not why he had driven 90 minutes. Ray had been a K9 handler for 11 years, not a desk officer who occasionally worked with dogs, a real handler, the kind who ate with his boy, trained 6 days a week, and could read a German shepherd the way other men read weather. He knew what a working vest looked like on a dog still on assignment. He knew what it looked like on a dog that had been abandoned inside one. These were not the same thing, not even close. He had surrendered Zeus 14 months ago after Route 9. A fragment took out 2 tendons in his right hand. He could drive. He could return to patrol. But K9 work required 2 fully functional hands. Department policy, not a negotiation. They reassigned Zeus to a younger handler named Cole Reeves within 3 weeks of Ray's medical clearance. 6 weeks after that, Cole quit the force entirely. Personal reasons, nothing on file. Zeus went to the county kennel. Ray had not known any of that until Tuesday. A friend from the department sent him 1 photo and 4 words. Auctioning Zeus tomorrow morning. Ray had sat at the kitchen table looking at it for a long time without moving. He did not tell Sandra where he was going the next day. He told himself he was coming to say goodbye and almost believed it by the time he pulled into the lot. He was standing at the back of the yard now, looking at a book in a fully maintained tactical vest. Maintained through a handler change, through 6 months in a county kennel, through whatever had happened in between. Someone had kept every buckle fastened, every strap tight, the carrying handle flat and clean against the back. Kennel staff did not do that. They fed these in cleaned runs. They did not maintain K9 tactical gear. Ray had been standing still for 4 minutes. He knew because he had been counting without deciding to, the way 11 years had built into him, tracking time without a clock. 4 minutes watching a vest that nobody else in this yard had looked at twice. The crowd pointed at younger dogs. The auctioneer made marks on his clipboard. Nobody here understood what they were looking at. Ray was not entirely sure he did either, but he was not going to look away. Something was in that vest. He did not know what. He knew it the same way a dog knows, not from evidence, not from logic, but from the part of him that 11 years of real work had trained past the point where it needed to explain itself. The auctioneer stepped up to cage 12 last. He read the tape the way he read all the others. Number 12, Zeus, 8 years, retired K9, no certification on file, starting bid, $10. Nobody moved. Ray stood at the back with his hands in his pockets. He had told himself he was not going to bid. He had no yard. He had a small house and a wife who had not been consulted and a right hand that could not do the work this dog was trained for. He had every practical reason not to raise his hand. The auctioneer said it again. $10. Do I have 10? The crowd was quiet. Someone coughed. A buyer near the front checked his phone. The auctioneer's eyes moved across the rows. Nothing. Ray heard his own voice before he decided to use it. 10. Sold. And then Zeus lay down. Not in the way of a frightened animal. He lay down the way a trained K9 lies down when ordered to hold position under any conditions. Chest flat to the floor, front legs extended straight, head up, eyes forward. The exact posture of a dog told, stay here, no matter what, until I come back. Ray had given that command hundreds of times. He had watched Zeus execute it in parking lots and courtrooms and the back of patrol cars at 2 in the morning. He knew precisely what that posture communicated. It communicated, I am ready. I am not going anywhere without you. The auctioneer said $10 for the third time. His voice had lost even the pretense of a sales pitch. He was just counting down to closing. Ray heard his own voice before he decided to use it. 10. The auctioneer's eyes found him. Sold. $10. Ray pushed through to the front. An attendant unlocked the gate. Zeus walked out the way he had walked into every situation Ray had ever put him in. Measured, deliberate, professional. He stopped in front of Ray and sat, not with frantic joy, with something quieter. The recognition of a professional completing an assignment that had been open for 14 months. Ray crouched down. He put his left hand on the side of Zeus's neck. The dog leaned into it slightly, the way he always had at the end of a long shift. Ray pressed his forehead against Zeus's forehead. He had done this 1,000 times, after hard calls, After Route 9 in the ambulance bay the last time he had seen him, he stayed there for a moment. Neither of them moved. In the parking lot, Ray opened the rear door of his truck. Zeus jumped in without being told. He had ridden in that truck 300 times. He circled once and lay down. The vest was still on, every buckle fastened. Ray got in the front and sat without starting the engine. He looked at Zeus in the rearview mirror. Zeus was looking back. Ray said, "Okay." He started the truck and drove. The entire 90 minutes home, he checked the mirror every few minutes. Zeus was awake for all of it. Not anxious, not pacing, just present, watching the road the same way he had watched every road they had ever driven together. The vest stayed on the whole drive. Ray noticed this the way you notice something wrong in a room you know well. A picture crooked. A chair moved 2 inches. He did not stop to examine it yet. Sandra was in the kitchen when Ray came through the back door. She turned and saw the dog and went still. "That's Zeus," she said, not a question. "Yeah, you said you were going to watch." "I know." She looked at the dog. Then she looked at Ray's face, and whatever she found there made her stop asking. She crouched and held out the back of her hand. Zeus examined it and then permitted her to scratch behind his ear, which he had always permitted exactly one person to do without being invited. Sandra went to the refrigerator without speaking. She took out leftover roast chicken, put some in a bowl, set it on the floor. Zeus looked at Ray. Ray nodded. Zeus ate. Ray stood in the doorway watching his dog eat from his wife's good mixing bowl and felt something loosen in his chest that had been pulled tight for 14 months. That evening, Ray set up Zeus's old bed in the corner of the bedroom. He had kept it in the storage closet, still in the bag, for 14 months. He hung the old leather lead on the hook by the back door. He found Zeus's food bowl in the cabinet above the dryer and washed it out. Around 9, he was in the living room with the television on. Zeus was on the rug. The vest was still on him. Every working dog Ray had ever handled shed the vest at the first opportunity. It was the clearest signal a canine gave. Finished, off duty, at rest. Zeus had not given that signal. Ray looked at the dog. He had been looking at that vest on and off since the auction without letting himself fully focus on it. He focused on it now. Something had been pulling at him since the parking lot, since the drive, since the auctioneer reached for that buckle and was stopped by a growl. Ray crossed the room and sat on the floor beside Zeus. "Let me take that off." He reached for the chest buckle. Zeus did not growl. He watched Ray's hand approach with that particular stillness, not indifference but held attention. Ray paused. He sat back on his heels and looked at the vest. He ran his hand across the chest panel, along the side. He turned the front panel over and examined the lining. The lining had been restitched, not factory stitching. Different thread, slightly heavier gauge, a shade darker than the original, running about 4 inches along the inside edge of the front panel. Someone had opened this lining and sewn it back. Deliberately, carefully. The stitching was clean and intentional. Whoever had done it knew how to sew and had taken their time. Ray came back with scissors. He worked the tip under the restitched thread, 1 stitch at a time. Zeus watched without moving. The thread gave cleanly, sewn to be open, not to hold permanently. Ray worked 4 inches of seam and folded the lining back. Inside pressed flat against the inner surface of the panel, sealed in a small Ziploc bag. was a folded piece of paper. Ray did not move. He looked at the bag. He looked at Zeus. Zeus was watching his face with the steady attention of a boy that has been carrying something for a long time and understands, in whatever way dogs understand things, that the delivery has been made. Ray picked up the bag. The plastic was sealed tight. He could see handwriting through it. He recognized the handwriting before he opened the bag. He had read it on incident reports and shift logs, in notes left on the desk between them over 6 years. The slight forward lean, the capital R that always looked more like a P with an extra leg. Marcus Webb's handwriting. Ray sat on the floor with the sealed bag in both hands and did not open it. He breathed. Sandra appeared in the doorway. She looked at Ray's face and then at the bag, and she did not speak. She sat down on the floor beside him, which she had not done since they were young, and she waited. Zeus had not moved. He was watching Ray's face with that patient attention, the attention of a toy that has completed its assignment and is simply present for whatever comes next. Ray opened the bag. He unfolded the paper. 3 pages written front and side in Marcus's handwriting. The date at the top was February 14th, 14 months ago, 6 days after Route 9. The paper had the slight texture of hospital notepad paper. Ray looked at the date for a long time. February 14th. Marcus had died February 17th. He had written this 3 days before he died, while Ray was 3 floors up in the same hospital, unable to walk the stairs, while Zeus was at the kennel, waiting for reassignment, while neither of them knew yet how any of it was going to end. Ray looked at the first line. He looked at Zeus. Zeus was looking back at him with that same steady, patient attention he had held all night. Ray read. The first line read, "Ray, if you're reading this, Zeus found you. That means he did his job better than either of us could have." Ray stopped. He read that sentence again. He read it a third time. He had spent 14 months carrying the weight of things left unsaid, of conversations that had not happened because there had been no way to have them, of a hospital room 3 floors up that he could not walk to, of a funeral he had watched from a car in the parking lot because he could not do the stairs yet. He had spent 14 months with a report folded in his chest pocket and a wool he had built around the absence of any other structure. And Marcus had opened a letter, written on hospital notepad paper, in the handwriting Ray had read on 100 shift logs, with the answer to something Ray had never been able to ask out loud. If you're reading this, Zeus found you. Ray sat with that sentence. He thought about Marcus writing this on the 14th, Valentine's Day, which neither of them had ever acknowledged as anything other than a shift day, writing 3 pages with 2 bullets in him, handing the delivery to a dog, trusting the dog to complete it. That trust had been earned over 8 years. Zeus had completed it. Sandra had not moved beside him. Zeus had not moved. Ray read on. Marcus had written about Route 9. He had written about it the way he had always talked about difficult things, directly without softening the edges. He wrote that he had gone back in because he heard something, a sound from the northeast corner where the secondary office was. He wrote that he knew the protocol. He had been the one who explained the protocol to Ray in year 1, standing in a parking lot after a training exercise, talking about what you do not do in collapsing structures. He had known it completely and had chosen to go back in anyway, and that choice was his, not Ray's, not a failure of communication or timing, his choice. He had heard something, and he had gone back, and the floor had failed, and that was the whole sequence, with no other names attached to it. He wrote, "You did not leave me. I went back in." Those are different things. I need you to understand they are different things before I say anything else. Ray put the letter down on his knee. He looked at the ceiling. He pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. He had heard those two sentences in different forms from three different people over 14 months and had not been able to receive them because those people had not been there. Marcus had been there. Marcus had all the standing there was. Ray breathed. Sandra put her hand on his forearm. Ray had been carrying a specific weight for 14 months. Not grief exactly. Grief he understood. Grief had a shape he could work with. This was something more precise and more corrosive. The belief that he had made a choice on Route 9, a choice not to go back in, and that the choice had been wrong, and that Marcus had died in the space created by that choice. That the space between protocol and action was where Marcus had been lost. He had never said this to anyone, not to Sandra, not to the department counselor who had visited twice after the surgery, not to the three different people who had told him in three different ways that he had done everything correctly. He had listened and nodded, and the weight had stayed exactly where it was, because the weight was not about what other people believed. It was about what he knew. Marcus had known. From a hospital bed with two bullets in him, writing on notepad paper at an angle that must have hurt his shoulder, Marcus had known exactly what Ray was carrying and had written the letter to address it, not to comfort, not to offer reassurances that would dissolve in the dark, to correct, to correct it with the only authority that had any weight, the authority of the person who had been there, who had made the choice, who had been on the floor when it failed, speaking clearly from the record of what had actually happened. The third page was about Zeus. Marcus had written that he had asked a nurse named Patricia to help him. He wrote her name twice. Patricia, third floor, Tuesday shift, as if he wanted Ray to be able to find her if he ever needed to. He had asked her to open the lining of the vest and seal the letter inside. Patricia had brought a small sewing kit from the nurse's station and done it on her lunch break, and Marcus had watched her from the bed and thanked her. And she had said she did not need to be thanked because she had read enough of the letter to understand what it was. Marcus wrote that Zeus had been brought in once by a handler who wanted clearance to visit, and that Marcus had spent 40 minutes with him in the hospital room. He wrote, "He stayed on the floor beside my bed the entire time. He didn't ask for anything. He just stayed. I knew then that he would carry this. I told him, 'Find Ray.' I don't know if he understood the words, but he understood something. You know how they do. You've always known how they do." Ray thought about those 40 minutes. Zeus on the floor of a hospital room, just staying, not requiring anything. Being present because being present was the job. Zeus had never stopped knowing what the Yi was. Not in the kennel, not at the auction, not for 14 months of waiting with all four buckles fastened. Ray looked at Zeus. Zeus was looking at him. The letter continued for most of the third page with instructions, not suggestions, instructions, written the way Marcus had always given them. He wrote that Zeus's left rear hip would need to be monitored starting around age 10, that a vet named Calloway on Route 7 had Zeus's full history going back to his first year and would know what to watch for. He wrote that Zeus liked to sleep with his back against something solid, a wall, furniture, a person if available, and that if Ray gave him the corner of the bedroom, he would stop checking the door at night within 2 weeks. He wrote that Zeus took his arthritis medication best in peanut butter and that he had always preferred the cheap brand to the expensive one, which Marcus said was characteristic of Zeus's entire personality. Ray read the instructions twice, not because he missed anything the first time, because they were Marcus's voice, practical and direct and slightly bossy in the specific way Marcus had always been bossy about things he cared about. And reading them twice meant hearing that voice twice. And Ray was not going to stop at once when twice was available. He wrote, "He's done his job. Now you do yours. Take care of him the way he took care of me when you couldn't be there." That's not an accusation. That's an assignment. You've always been better with assignments than with open time. So here's yours. Take care of Zeus. Everything else will follow from that. The last paragraph was written in slightly larger letters than the rest. The way Marcus wrote things, he wanted to make sure were read clearly the first time. He wrote, "I don't want you to be okay right away. That would mean you hadn't been paying attention, but I want you to get there eventually. You're good at the gym, and you've always been good at the gym, and you were good at it before I was your partner, and you'll be good at it after. The job is not Route 9. Route 9 was one night. You've had 1,000 nights. Don't let one of them be the last thing that defines you. Have 1,000 more." He signed it the way he signed everything, his last name only. Webb. No first name, no closing sentiment, just Webb. Ray had seen that signature on paperwork and reports and one birthday card over 6 years. He knew what it meant in Marcus's language. It meant, "This is what I have to say, and I mean all of it, and I trust you to know that without me explaining it further." The most Marcus thing he could have done. Write 3 pages and end with a single word that contained everything else. Ray folded the letter back along its original lines. He held it in both hands for a long time. Sandra was still beside him. Zeus had not moved. Outside the window, the neighborhood was quiet at 10 o'clock on a weeknight. Ray sat in the middle of all of it and held the letter and let what was happening happen at its own pace. Then he put his hand on Zeus's back. Zeus pressed into the touch the way he always had at the end of a long shift. Sandra read the letter after Ray. She read it without speaking and folded it back carefully along the same lines Ray had used and held it in her lap for a long moment. She was one of the people in Ray's life who understood that some things did not need immediate language around them. After a while, she said, "He knew you." Ray said, "Yeah." She said, "He knew exactly what you were doing to yourself." Ray did not answer. She said, "Are you going to be able to put it down now?" Ray looked at Zeus stretched out on the rug between them, the vest finally off and folded on the chair cushion, the letter on the floor beside the open Ziploc bag, the scissors on the coffee table with a small curl of thread still on the blade. He thought about the 14 months. He thought about the kitchen table at 2 a.m. and the dark drives and the report folded so many times the paper had gone soft at every crease. He thought about all the mornings he had picked it back up and carried it out of the house because that weight had become the only weight he knew how to carry. Zeus lifted his head and looked at Ray and then put it back down slowly. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing, Ray said. "I don't know yet, but it's different now." Sandra nodded. She understood the difference. The other answer had been, "There is nothing to put down." That one had been a wall. This one was a door. The next morning, Ray called Diane Webb. He had not spoken to her since he had sent a card after the funeral he had not attended. He had written 4 drafts of that card and sent the 4th because it was the most honest and the most inadequate, and he had known it was inadequate when he sealed the envelope. She answered on the 3rd ring. He said, "It's Ray Daniels." She said, "I know." There was a silence that was not uncomfortable, just honest. Ray said, "I got the letter." Diane did not answer immediately. Then she said, "He wrote it on the 14th. He made me promise not to contact you about it. He said Zeus would handle the delivery and that if I interfered, he would be very annoyed with me, wherever he ended up." There was something in her voice when she said it. Not quite a laugh, not quite not a laugh. The specific tone of a person who has learned to carry someone's humor alongside their grief, because putting one down means putting both down. Ray said, "I should have been at the funeral." Diane said, "You were in the hospital." Ray said, "I should have found a way." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Ray, he knew where you were. He knew exactly where you were on those stairs. That's why he wrote the letter instead of waiting for you to come to him." Ray held the phone. He said, "How are you doing?" She said, "Getting there. You?" He said, "Getting there." It was the most accurate thing either of them had said in a long time. Ray drove to Diane Webb's house on a Saturday 11 days after the auction. He brought Zeus. He had not planned it exactly that way, but Zeus had been in the truck before Ray had fully decided to take him, which had been happening more frequently, and Ray looked at him in the passenger seat and decided not to argue with it. Diane opened the door and saw the dog and put her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she crouched down and let Zeus come to her. Zeus went directly to her the way he went to everyone who mattered in this story, not tentatively, not waiting for an invitation, just going, with the same clean intention he had brought to everything since the auction yard. Diane sat on the front step with Zeus beside her for a long time. Her 2 children came out. The younger one, who was 7, sat down next to Zeus without asking permission and put his head against the dog's flank. Zeus did not move. Steady, present, not asking for anything. Simply there. Ray stood at the edge of the driveway with his hands in his pockets. He did not try to make it into something it was not. He just let it be what it was. A family, a Saturday morning, the quietness of something that had been a long time coming and had finally arrived. That evening, Ray sat at the kitchen table with the letter on the table in front of him, not folded in his chest pocket, not in the storage closet, on the table, in the light, where it could exist in the open. Sandra was at the stove. Zeus was on his bed in the corner with his back against the wall, exactly where Marcus had said he would want to be, and he had stopped checking the door at night after 9 days instead of 2 weeks, which Ray noted without saying anything because some things you let be true without needing to announce them. Ray looked at the letter. He looked at Zeus. He thought about 1,000 nights, the parking lots and patrol cars and 48 calls and shift logs, with that single word signature at the bottom. And he thought about the one still ahead, which he had not been thinking about for 14 months, because the wall had made the future feel like something that happened to other people, not to him. He thought, have 1,000 more. He folded the letter once and put it in the drawer of the side table where he kept things that mattered. He got up and helped Sandra with dinner. They did not talk much. They did not need to. Zeus did not move from his corner, but his eyes followed Ray across the kitchen. Ray noticed. He had always been good at noticing what mattered, even in the periods when everything else had been too loud to hear clearly. The loud period was ending. He could feel it ending the way you feel a long winter beginning to lose its grip, not gone yet, but moving. Ray went back to work 3 weeks after the auction. Not to K9, his hand would not allow K9 and he had stopped pretending it would. He went back to patrol, which he had been doing part-time since the surgery, but not fully, not with both feet, not with the specific quality of presence that makes work real rather than just something you show up for. He went back fully this time. He drove his sector. He answered his calls. He did the paperwork without letting it accumulate. He ate his lunch in the parking lot of the gas station on Route 11, which was not Route 9 and was just a parking lot with bad coffee and a view of a field that went orange in autumn. He had been eating lunch there for 12 years. He ate lunch there again on his first day back and on every day after. His captain noticed the difference without naming it, which was the correct response. The captain was a man who had learned that the most useful thing you can do when someone returns to themselves is to not make a performance of it. He put Ray on a regular rotation and said nothing about the 14 months. He put a coffee on Ray's desk the first morning without making it a conversation. Ray drank it and went to work. Zeus was in the truck for the first 2 weeks. Not officially. Ray had not asked permission because he had not wanted to have a conversation about it. Zeus rode in the back and watched the road and was there at the end of each shift. And Ray drove home with him the same way he had driven home for 11 years before Route 9. The same exit, the same two-lane, the same driveway. The drive home was the same drive it had always been. That was exactly what it needed to be. Two officers on the morning rotation asked about Zeus. Ray said, "That's my dog." They said, "Oh." That was the end of the conversation. Some things communicate themselves without requiring elaboration. The first week back, he drove past the intersection on Route 9 twice. He did not slow down. He drove past it the way you drive past places that used to mean something until you have driven past them enough times that the meaning settles into proportion and takes its correct place among all the other places you have driven past over a career. Not forgotten, present at its actual size. The vest went on the shelf above Ray's desk in the second week of November. He did not put it there ceremonially. He put it there the way you put something on a shelf, practically, because it needed a place, and that was the right place for things in his life that needed to be present without needing to be in the way. He cleaned it first, wiped the nylon down, checked all four buckles, worked each one open and closed to confirm the mechanisms were clean. The nylon had worn smooth in places from years of use. The department patch on the left chest panel was faded to near illegibility, but the shape of it was still there. Ray folded the vest the way he had been taught to fold it in year one and set it on the shelf and stepped back and looked at it. He had put Marcus's department photo beside it, not a formal portrait, a photo someone had taken at a training day in year 4. Marcus in full gear with a cup of terrible coffee, grinning at something off camera, one hand pointing at Zeus as if making a point that Zeus was entirely ignoring. Ray had found it in a box in the storage closet where he had put things after Route 9 without going through them. He had gone through the box in October. It had taken most of an afternoon. He had needed to stop twice, but he had finished it. The photo and the vest sat on the shelf. Zeus slept in his corner. Ray sat at the desk some evenings and worked. Paperwork, training notes, evaluation reports, and did not look at the shelf in any particular way. He just worked. The shelf was there. The photo was there. That was enough. You do not need to look directly at the things that matter every time you are in the same room with them. You just need to know they are present. He stood in front of the shelf for a while the evening he put the vest up, not performing anything, just standing in his office at the end of a Tuesday with a dog asleep in the corner. After a while, he sat down and wrote 3 paragraphs of evaluation notes and went to bed. That was the evening. In December, Ray started volunteering with the department's K-9 training program, not as a handler, as an evaluator. He watched young officers work their dogs and told them what he saw. The watching part had always come naturally, the reading of what was happening between a person and an animal, and being able to say clearly what was working and what wasn't, where the trust was built correctly and where it had a gap. He had always been better at this than the paperwork. His captain had told him this in year 3 and had meant it as a mild criticism, and Ray had taken it as the accurate observation it was. He watched a 24-year-old named Torres work a 2-year-old Belgian Malinois named Scout through a search scenario and told him afterward that he was giving too many verbal commands and not enough time. He said, "A dog that good doesn't need to be told what to do at every step. He needs to be trusted to work. If you're telling him every move, you're not working together. You're operating equipment." Torres listened without arguing and ran the scenario again, and the second run was measurably better. And Torres looked at Ray afterward with the expression of a person who has just understood something they will carry for a long time. Ray drove home that evening and told Sandra about Torres and Scout at the dinner table. He could not remember the last time he had come home from anything work-related and talked about it at dinner without being asked. Sandra listened and asked questions and did not make anything of the fact that he was talking, which was the right call and the call she had always made. He said, "I know I've been quiet for a while." She said, "I know too." They finished dinner. The program coordinator, a lieutenant named Hess, pulled Ray aside after the third session and said, "I want you to come back next month." Ray said, "I was planning to." Hess said, "I know. I just wanted to say it out loud." He said it the way the captain had put the coffee on the desk, not making it a moment, just making it real. Zeus turned 9 in February. Ray noted the birthday the way Marcus's letter had specified: specific peanut butter, specific treat. Information Ray had followed precisely because Marcus's instructions tended to be correct and because following them was one of the ways Ray kept the conversation going in the only direction it could go now. Zeus accepted the treat with the dignified appreciation of an animal that has earned its preferences. The left rear hip was doing what Calloway had predicted: slower on cold mornings, stiff for the first 10 minutes, functional after that. Ray gave him the medication and peanut butter every morning. Zeus took it every morning. This was their agreement. Calloway said, "He's in good shape for his age and his history." The history included 8 years of active K-9 work and 14 months in a county kennel, and it had left its marks the way all histories do, not crippling, just present in the body. He was slower. He tired in the afternoon. He slept more and checked the door less. He had claimed the corner of the bedroom completely, and Ray had stopped thinking of it as Zeus's temporary corner and started thinking of it as Zeus's corner, full stop. The way you stop thinking of a person's chair as the chair they usually sit in and start thinking of it as their chair. Ray watched him age with the attentiveness of someone trying to memorize what is in front of them without making the memorizing visible. He watched. He noted. He said nothing about what he was noting. He made sure Zeus had what he needed every morning and that the corner was warm. One evening in March, Ray found Zeus in the kitchen doorway, looking at him. Ray looked back. Zeus held the look. Ray said, "What do you need?" Zeus walked to his water bowl, which was empty. Ray filled it. Zeus drank. Ray watched him drink and thought, I can do that. I can do that every day. On a Tuesday morning in March, Ray drove his sector and ate his lunch at the gas station on Route 11 and finished his shift and drove home. Zeus was in the back. The radio was on something neither of them was particularly listening to. The drive was the same drive it had always been. The exit off 47, the two-lane through the development, the left on Calder, the driveway. Ray pulled in and turned off the engine and sat for a moment the way he sometimes sat at the end of a shift. Not because anything was wrong, but because the transition between the truck and the house was a good place to breathe. He had learned this from a captain in his second year. The transition is yours. Don't give it away. Zeus put his chin on the back of the front seat. Ray reached back without turning around and put his hand on the dog's head. They stayed like that for a moment. It was not a significant moment in any way that would have been visible from outside. It was a Tuesday. It was the end of a Tuesday that had been unremarkable, necessary, completed. Ray had had 1,000 of them. He would have more. He got out of the truck. Zeus got out behind him. Sandra had left the kitchen light on, which she had done every evening for 23 years, in which Ray had never once taken for granted. Even in the 14 months when he had not been able to say that clearly enough to mean it. He could say it now. He went inside. Zeus followed. The door closed behind them both. What Zeus had carried for 14 months was not a letter. The letter was paper. What Zeus had carried was the specific refusal of a good dog to let something important go undelivered. The knowledge, in whatever wordless way dogs hold knowledge, that there was something unfinished between two people who mattered, and that he was the one who could finish it, and that he was going to finish it if it took 14 months in a county kennel and one auction at $10 and a 90-minute drive in a living room floor at 11 o'clock at night. He had done his job. He had always done his job. He was done now. He was home. The vest was on the shelf. The letter was in the drawer. Ray was at the table. Zeus was in his corner. Sandra was at the stove. The kitchen light was on. That was everything. That was enough.